Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 4th of December 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. Well,
we're going to Watford because, of course, it is the NATO leaders meeting taking place in the Grove Hotel in Watford, which, of course, is where Bilderberg was held in 2013. There appears to be very little agreement between the various leaders that are there. We'll come on to why that is in a second. But because there's no agreement, it is, well, they're admitting it's a shortened meeting. They're being very careful to say that it's not a summit, it's a leaders meeting. And of course, it's to commemorate the 70th anniversary of NATO, because in 1949, the UK was one of the 12 founding members, not the only thing we were founding at that time. Now they're going to take decisions, they claim, on further strengthening the alliance and continuing its adaptation, whatever that means. What is it going to be adapted into? That is a big question. They're going to look at heading into space, perhaps. They're certainly looking at prosecuting a hybrid war with just about everybody under the sun. They're recognizing that, as I say, space is an operational domain, is how they're describing it, but they're particularly concerned about China. We'll come on to that in a second in a moment as well. So last night, of course, they were meeting Her Maj, the Queen, and they all looked very happy.
Except the Queen, who looks a little bit squashed, I think.
Yeah, well, that is true. Maybe it's because Donald Trump's too fat or something. I don't know. But
Boris Johnson appears to be leaning on Her Majesty, which is.
But anyway, yesterday there was lots going on. Donald Trump met with Jens Stoltenberg. Here they are together. And I have to say that if anybody's watched any of the coverage of this, Stoltenberg spent most of the time looking pretty glum. Trump, for his part, really had a go at France. He said Mr. Macron was very rude about NATO. And France, well, France needs the USA. They aren't paying their share in defence. They want to tax our corporations, and let me tell you, and he was quite severe about this, if anyone's going to tax our corporations, it'll be us, he said. So we will be taxing the French for any stuff that they try to import into the United States, particularly their wine. So he was pretty hard on France while he was sitting with Jens Stoltenberg. Then, what was it, an hour later, he was sitting down with Monsieur Macron himself. And what did he say then? Well, then he said, we'll be talking about a lot of things together, including NATO, including trade. We'll do a lot of trade with France. We have a minor dispute. I think we'll probably be able to work it out, but we have a big trade relationship, and I'm sure within a short period of time, things will be looking very rosy. So, I don't know really what goes through Donald Trump's mind half the time, because
completely opposite statements there.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Within a relatively short space of time.
Absolutely. Well, of course, as we highlighted a second ago, he was particularly concerned about France attempting to tax US corporations, and particularly the big tech giants like Google, Facebook, and Twitter. Well, unfortunately for Donald, it's not just France that wants to tax them. Boris wants to tax them as well. He feels that they need to pay their fair share. So then the question is, are they really talking about strengthening the alliance? Are they talking about continuing its adaptation? There seems to be no consensus between the various leaders about what NATO's purpose actually is. Now, we've mentioned that last week when Jens Stoltenberg met Macron, that Macron highlighted what he was thinking in the joint press conference, that NATO needs to be completely rethought, that we need to make friends with Russia, that the joint enemy is terrorism, and he asked, was it the purpose of NATO to identify Russia or China as our enemy? He didn't think so. And he said that a genuine alliance requires action, decisions, and not words. But he was pretty vociferous that, as far as he is concerned, NATO needs to be making friends with Russia, and that NATO should not be going out of its way to identify Russia and China as their enemy. So, well, did he get any agreement from Trump on this? Well, actually, he did, absolutely. And Trump said, I think we could get along with Russia. I think you feel, he was talking to about Macron there, you feel we could get along with Russia. We've discussed that before, but certainly we have to be prepared, whether it's Russia or somebody else, we have to be prepared. But he and I, that's Macron, have a pretty similar view on that. I think we feel we can get along with Russia, and I think it's a good thing to get along with Russia. So Macron and Trump seem to be in agreement on that. What about other NATO leaders? Are they in agreement on that? Well, here we have Boris meeting Macron and also the leaders of Turkey and Germany. I've captioned that we hate Russia, but actually do they? Well, no, because Turkey's just bought S-400s, as we know, and Macron and Merkel are dying to do more trade with Russia. And of course, Boris is quite happy to take Russian money into the Conservative Party. So no, they don't hate Russia either. So it seems that Stoltenberg's out on a limb here a little bit, or is he? Well, not quite, because here we have the headline from the Times saying NATO must not trust Russia, says President Nausėda of Lithuania, and he was pretty vociferous about this. His language is quite strong. He said Russia continues malign activities against all of us, disinformation and propaganda, hybrid activities and cyber attacks, meddling in other countries' lives with its own agenda. Stoltenberg at least had some support on this. So let's head over to Stoltenberg himself. And of course, he highlighting the issue with China, saying this is not about moving NATO into the South China Sea, but it is about taking into account that China is coming closer to us in the Arctic, in Africa, investing heavily in our infrastructure. So I think this is where it really, where the crunch point comes. What we're seeing, the reason that we're seeing such disagreement within the NATO leaders at the moment is two competing policy agendas going on here. NATO clearly wants Russia and China because these are obvious enemies. NATO wants those to be there because this justifies NATO's existence, Brian. But the EU, on the other hand, is much more interested in Africa. China is in Africa, so perhaps the EU may view China as being an enemy in that case. But terrorism is the EU's main focus, because terrorism is the legitimacy that they use, or that's the excuse that they use for being in the Sahel countries, because they have a terrorism problem. So whether we're going to see any kind of positive outcome from this at the end of the day, I don't know. But there certainly seem to be competing agendas at work here.
Yeah, it's very difficult to get your head around what is actually going on at the moment, except we can see very clearly they are trying desperately to get EU defence union completed. And of course, they can't do that if America is still there calling the defence shots. So they've got to sideline the Americans, because otherwise things will stay as they've always been, which is the military power base is the Americans, and then the Europeans are the number two shots on the side of that. So they don't want that for EU defence union. So somehow the Americans have got to be pushed to one side. Does Trump understand that, you think? Do you think he's starting to wake up to the fact that European diplomacy is going to shaft him?
No, I don't think he is thinking in those terms at all. I think he is thinking totally in terms of trade, and he is extremely concerned that as the EU moves its defence policy forward, that US companies won't get their bit of their piece of the pie. He's very concerned about that. But, you know, as far as the EU goes, Africa seems to be their key focus. This is not the key focus of NATO, at least up to date. And we shouldn't forget that, of course, what was it, 18 months ago, the EU said that they view their southern border as being the southern border of Niger.
Yep.
So this is the type of thinking that we have in the EU. And clearly the EU also, though, wants to encourage trade with Russia, and so they are wanting to downplay this Russia is the ultimate enemy narrative, perhaps less so with China.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this one unfolds, Mike, but we're just going to remind people that why are we so hot on this subject of defence, particularly at the moment, is the fact that UK is not out of EU defence union. In fact, it's being buried further and deeper into that union. And this effectively means we do not have full control of our own armed forces, which has huge constitutional implications. None of the parties are talking about these issues, a wall of silence.
Well, absolutely. But so let's just remind ourselves what Nigel Farage said at the launch of the Brexit Party manifesto.
My problem with it is the withdrawal agreement does not take us out of the European Defence Union. I do want to have a debate about the European Army during this general election. I do want to have a debate about the Five Eyes intelligence network, which we rely upon so much. And I've deliberately chosen not to put it in here today because I felt, apart from you, it would have got lost. But when President Trump arrives on the 2nd of December, we're going to have 3 days when we are talking about NATO, where we are talking about defence, and I will say a lot more on that subject then.
So no doubt everyone is staggered by the number of comments that Nigel Farage has made about EU defence and the question of, if you remember, he went on to say that the UK now has to make a decision about whether it intends to pursue defence on an EU basis or on a NATO basis. He said quite clearly there that he was going to have a lot to say while Donald Trump is in this country. And we've had complete silence from him over the last 2 days. I haven't heard anything today from him either. So Farage clearly reneging on that particular promise.
All the discussion is in secret, and the British public, as usual, is not entitled to know what's being said.
He was absolutely clear in that. He was speaking to a journalist. I am going to be speaking to you lot much more about this in 2 weeks' time when Trump is in this country, and he seems to have said nothing to the mainstream media to follow up. Now, I wanted to, Brian, highlight this article. It's quite interesting. It's on the Defend Truth website. Labour's new leader is a threat to our national security. The headline is how the UK military and intelligence establishment is working to stop Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister. And so what they were doing was looking at the number of placed stories in the mainstream media over the last couple of years on Jeremy Corbyn and where these stories have been coming from. So they say officials in the UK military and intelligence establishment have been sources for at least 34 major national media stories that cast Jeremy Corbyn as a danger to British security. New research shows the stories, which quote former and current members of the Army, Navy and Special Forces, as well as MI5, MI6 and an ex-senior civil servant, have averaged one every 6 weeks since Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party in September 2015. There have, however, been significant spikes in frequency during the 2017 and 2019 general election campaigns. Nearly every story appeared in 4 papers: the Daily Telegraph, the Times, the Daily Mail or the Sun. 440 articles in the UK press since September 2015 specifically mention Corbyn as a threat to national security. The intelligence services and military are supposed to abide by the constitutional principle of non-involvement in political affairs, they say. And they go on to give much more detail on that. So I do suggest that people go and read that article and make up your own minds. But it's fascinating research, if it's correct.
And we need to remember that we've now got a civil service in this country which is completely politicised itself. And we've got Mark Sedwill not only in charge of the whole civil service, but in charge of the large chunks of the security services and their budgets as well. So if you were going to get up to dirty tricks and you didn't want Labour in the game, it'd be pretty easy to start pumping this stuff out.
Absolutely. Okay, quick advertisement. If you like what the UK Column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community. And there are various options for doing that there. Your support, much needed and much appreciated. And once again, can I just thank everyone who has picked up one of these membership vouchers as a Christmas gift. That is much appreciated as well.
Indeed. Well, the subject is fish, Mike. Where does this come in? Well, I was actually at home over the weekend. I did hear some of the reports on the latest London Bridge terrorist attack, but it wasn't until Monday when I was able to watch your good self and Patrick Henningsen on UK Column News that I started to be thinking a bit deeper into what had gone on. And of course, one of the things that you came up with is that information with regard to some of the organisations connected to this event were offline. Well, I did a little bit more research on it and came up with exactly the same thing around the Fishmongers Company. So if you go to have a deeper look at them, they're in maintenance, scheduled maintenance. So this might have been scheduled a long time ago, possibly, but it is interesting. And the other bit that was interesting is a look on Wayback Machine also said, well, actually, we haven't got any information on these people, which is a remarkable coincidence between Cambridge University and this one.
Right.
So suddenly we're all offline. So we thought we'd just follow through a bit more. You can see some information online. So this is a result of a basic internet search, and we can come up with the livery companies, the City of London. If you get into the Fishmongers organisation, I was quite interested that some of their senior people are themselves connected with fighting crime, and they're running an award scheme called National Crime Beat, where police forces and groups of young people and charities and other organisations around the country have been able to ask for an award on National Crime Beat. And I just found it interesting that I could link individuals from the Fishmongers organisation through to dealing with crime. Does it mean anything? Possibly not, but it is of interest. So let's have a look at some of the people speaking around the incident. And this was Toby Williamson, the chief executive of Fishmongers Hall. That was the venue that was used. And of course, he paid tribute to the actions of his staff during the terrorist attack. So this is the Guardian reporting on it. What I found interesting is that if you do your research through the fish, with that it's gone straight out of my head, the Fishmongers organisation, what we come up with is that this man is a former Royal Navy Commodore. And my question is who was responsible for security at this event? So we now know that we had some pretty hard high-level terrorist criminals being brought together in this venue. Presumably somebody must have taken action to say, well, what are we going to do about this and how are we going to protect staff and indeed the general public? We'll come back to that particular topic, but let's get an idea of how the terrorists were being looked after. This is from a Daily Mail article which has got a picture of the room that was being used to bring terrorists and graduates from Cambridge University together in order to be studying terrorism and crime and violence and law, and working together as a team. They were supposedly getting good results. So you're a terrorist, you've spent time in prison, and you're now turning up in this sort of location, Mike. What would this cost per day? I think a reasonable sum of money. But this is what it looks like. And in the, I've got to say, the really good Daily Mail article, they're pointing out that Cambridge, or graduates from Cambridge University, were actually tweeting out that they'd helped the terrorist himself to source a laptop, and they'd been doing a sort of charity event to get money for his laptop. So all of a sudden we're seeing something very different to what was pumped out in the mainstream press reports. And this is getting into the detail of it because the Learning Together initiative was started by these two ladies, Ruth Armstrong and Amy Ludlow. So they're from the Facility of Law and Criminology at Cambridge University. And these are the people who were able to bring graduates and some of their own professors together with terrorists. And I think we have to ask a question, how were they able to do this? How were they able to do it? Well, have a look at what Stephen Tope says, the Vice Chancellor of Cambridge. He said that the Learning Together scheme had been held up as an example of best practice by a 2016 review of prison education. But he said, we're really not thinking about the future, but I will say that this programme has been in existence for 5 years. It's done extremely good work. This is a dreadful, horrible and tragic situation, but we must put it in context of 5 years extraordinary work. Do you see the arrogance in that statement? We have been doing such a good job. The fact that a few people have now been stabbed and died, well, that's a problem, but we've been doing a good job. But the problem for the British public is we don't actually know what they've been doing and why. Now, he was questioned about risk assessments, and he said that risk assessments have been carried out by the university, the Ministry of Justice and the Probation Service ahead of Friday's event and other events held by the programme.
But they apparently didn't have any security identified, no security need identified to search people as they went in.
Well, were people searched? How do you get hold of a couple of knives? How do you have the gear or wear a so-called fake suicide belt? This does not stack up. And most importantly, we've got to ask ourselves, what were these people doing together with the terrorists? Now, if you go onto the Cambridge University website, you can get information. And here there's just information on their Director of Violence Research, the Director of the Violence Research Centre. He's worked at the University of Zurich. We're talking sociology, psychology here as I see it. There may be law as well, but this is very much about psychology. And he's boasting that he's worked with the World Health Organization, UNICEF. He goes on to talk about experimental criminology. And this is where this gets particularly dirty, because what we're now seeing is that Cambridge University has been carrying out experiments, and it's been using prisoners as part of those experiments, getting alongside them, getting into their heads, finding out what makes them tick, but also taking it as far as you put your graduates together with convicted criminals and or terrorists, and you're going to work together in order to reframe them, change the way they think. But they say absolutely this is experimental. It's a rapidly growing field with increasing influence on public policy decisions. So now we can see how they're so closely integrated with the government. And then this amazing claim, it's already been shown that it can prevent millions of violent crimes, as well as unnecessary pre-trial detention of millions of people.
They have evidence for that?
Where, Mike, is the evidence for this outrageous statement? And this is experimental. You are playing with people's minds. And we may say that we've got a convicted terrorist here, but the moment that man is taken into a British prison, he is at the total beck and call of the prison service. He's protected, he's fed, he's kept warm by that prison service because he can't protect himself. Could he protect himself from what these people were doing in relation to reframing? We just don't know. So if we put some of this together, this is where it all starts, the Cambridge Centre for Teaching and Learning, if we can just pop that up on the screen.
Yes.
And we've got to remember that we then come through to the worshipful company of fishmongers, where we've got senior ex-military people mixing with bankers, and as we've shown, they've got their own interest in crime prevention. And then we are bringing criminals and terrorists together with graduates, learning together, and we can bring in a seriously dangerous man as a star pupil. These are the questions that need to be answered. Institute of Criminology links into a thing called the Jerry Lee Center for Experimental Criminology. This takes us back to Philadelphia and the Americans. But we've got a tagged terrorist on parole, apparently not searched. So these people were not doing their job. So who was responsible for him overall? Was that the parole service? Was that Capita? Was that the Met Police? Who had overall responsibility for security at the event? Was the counter-terrorist squad informed, or did they even know? It's certainly not clear from statements that the Met Police have made Were they searched? And this is the key bit. Was he actually destabilized mentally as a result of the experimental stuff carried out on him? We've no way of knowing at the moment, but these are the questions that need to be asked. But I don't think it's a simple terrorist attack.
No, absolutely not. Lots of questions to be asked. How many of those questions that Patrick mentioned on Monday or that you've mentioned today have we seen in the mainstream press?
Virtually none. Although I have to say, about an hour and a half ago, there was a BBC report where they were at least starting to put some of these links together. So we'll see how this unfolds. But of course, if this had been, let's say this had been an event at some minor venue in another part of the country, I think we'd have seen the press and media crawling all over it.
Okay, here is Article 19, and they have released their Global Expression Report 2018-2019. What is this all about? It's all about freedom of expression in every country in the world, really. And they're saying too many countries are encouraging a downward trend in the rights of their own people. Well, I have to say that is true, the UK not least. Of course, they're encouraging this downward trend through the censorship actions of social media companies. We'll come on to that in a second. Now, they're saying that based on unrivaled qualitative data from 161 countries covering 2018 and a backward glance from 2019, the Global Expression Report details the factors that contribute to the health or otherwise of freedom of expression globally. They say that the data translates into a bald fact that 3 out of every 4 people on the planet are experiencing a deteriorating environment for freedom of expression. We extrapolate these figures from these figures that 5.5 billion people are living in countries where a vitally important human right is being increasingly restricted. So they've produced a nice little graphic which shows the countries with the highest freedom of expression, with Norway and Denmark there. The UK near the top for some reason, although I think that will be shifting its way down. The United States less free than the UK, but you'll notice that the UK is more or less on a par with countries like Chile. And as we move down, these countries become less open to freedom of expression. And of course, the country at the very end of the list, as you would expect, is North Korea. But what's fascinating about this, as far as I'm concerned, Brian, is as I say, the deterioration in terms of freedom of expression through social media. Now, social media has been a great enabler of freedom of expression up until this point. But since Theresa May began the program of shutting all that down 2 years ago, the situation is becoming worse and worse. And just one example of it is that, of course, Donald Trump at the moment is facing this hoax of an impeachment hearing, trial, whatever you want to call it, in the United States at the moment. And this is all based on an alleged telephone call which is supposed to have taken place with the new president of Ukraine. And there's a whistleblower involved. Now, of course, everybody knows the whistleblower's name, but we're not allowed to tell you what his name is, because anybody that's mentioning his name in a video presentation or who's putting his name in a social media post is having that video or social media post immediately removed by social media companies. Now, there is no law in the United States that protects the identities of whistleblowers whenever the whistleblower's identity is already public knowledge. There's no law at all, whether it's public knowledge or not. So nobody is breaking any law. And what's really having a chilling effect, in my opinion, is that social media companies are, in effect, making law up as they go along and making decisions of what people can and cannot say or do when there is no basis for it in the national legal system of the country that they're operating in. So this is a useful report as far as it goes, but they're really highlighting or trying to highlight the fact that many countries outside of the Western world are starting to shut down freedom of speech and freedom of expression. There's not enough focus, I think, on the direction of travel in the UK, the US and Europe.
Indeed, but of course, if those countries, Mike, are literally in bed with the political system or the politicians, it's very easy to do this, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Nick Clegg drifting across from politics into Facebook, David Cameron, close relations with senior presidents of Google, becomes very easy to put it into practice, because you've got friends in high places who are going to cover for whatever you do. Well, this caught my eye and amused me. The BBC getting very upset that the Chinese are putting lots of people into camps to re-educate them. This is pretty sinister stuff, there's no doubt about it. And if you have a close look at the picture on your screen, it's not only the ranks of men in their blue overalls. If you have a look to the top left of your screen, you can see the future police there with their video cameras and batons and dressed in black, and of course everything behind the wire screens. But of course it's how you do it, and if the Chinese are going for a full frontal approach, let's remember that the BBC is brainwashing people on an hour-by-hour daily basis, not only in UK but worldwide. And of course they've been particularly active in those eastern states, and we put up an article some considerable time ago now talking about the BBC's charity Media Action, but entitled Subversion from Broadcasting House to Kazakhstan. And what we can clearly see is that the BBC is brainwashing people. It's reframing them with their social views, their political views, their family views, even their sexual identity is now under attack by the BBC. But of course the BBC needs to try and show that it's an upstanding, truthful organisation. So we're going to get on to what the Chinese are doing in their camps. I just found this unbelievably cynical stuff. But it's not only the BBC up to a little bit of brainwashing, because I'm going to say a big thank you to one of our viewers who sent us a lot of invoices from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and this is to do with the FCO back working with our old friends Common Purpose. What we've got on screen, one invoice, but we have plenty of these, and we're dealing in tens of thousands of pounds of public money. What you can see, of course, is that information is being redacted, even though public money is being spent by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office on common purpose training courses. The public is not allowed to know the detail of how that money is being spent. And is
that because there's individuals' names on there?
Well, this is one of the things that's covered, Mike, that the course is so secretive we're not able to know who the individuals are. And I think we should challenge that, because if public money is being used, let's be really emotive here and say we've just talked about a gentleman who's a terrorist. Has Foreign and Commonwealth Office money been used to train him? Apparently we can't know in order to protect his identity. But if you have a look at what the Foreign and Commonwealth Office is doing, this is part of a Twitter page on FCO International Leaders Programme. So we are creating international leaders. Well, we're not, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office is. What are these people doing? Who are they? What positions do they occupy? Well, if you try and find this out, there's a link down here to a particular website. So if you press on that link, you're through to this, the International Leaders Programme. It's got the FCO logo all over it. Find connections through International Leaders Programme's global community. And we get some individuals who've recently joined. No identity for those individuals at all. And of course, if you try and find out, you are forced to try and get through a firewall.
You asked me before the program, Brian, if I remembered this particular program, and I couldn't remember, but I do now, because you've just now that I've seen the graphics for it. Now, I asked the Foreign and Commonwealth Office through Freedom of Information to find out who the latest batch of graduates were And I felt it's in the public interest to know if the Foreign and Commonwealth Office is creating international leaders, and those people are going back to their countries and getting involved in government in their own countries, then we should know, or at least those countries should know, whether they've been through that program or not. But was told absolutely not. We don't give the names of any graduates because that would be a breach of their data protection. But there's a public interest case here, it seems to me.
Absolute public interest case. Who are these people? What is their ideology? Is their ideology friendly to UK? They've come and benefited from a course that's been given by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. But who are these people? What's really in their heads? Why have they done it? What are they going to be doing in the future? Is it of benefit to the British public? All of a sudden, we've got a secret layer of government operating here. And we know, of course, that the FCO has been working to destabilise Eastern Europe in order to extend principally the European power base up to the Russian border. So I think this is a very serious issue. On one hand, we've got universities working with terrorists, trying to reframe them, playing with their minds. We're not to know about that. That's all quasi-secretive in the background. And on this level, we've got people coming in from other countries benefiting from courses with British public money. We're not to know about them either. So I think, as David Scott would say, we've got a government of occupation running at the moment. This is not a democratic government. There's something else happening.
Apologies we didn't cover this on Monday. This one completely passed me by. But last week, the end of last week, the National Health Federation issued a press release about Linda Thayer, who, of course, the colleague of David Noakes, that was involved in the production of GC-MAF in the UK, taken to France on a European arrest warrant and has been in prison while the allegations against her are being investigated. So she is not convicted of anything. She's in prison in France, still in a Paris prison. So the National Health Federation press release saying a Parisian court has ordered the French government today to release biochemist Linda Thayer from prison, where she's been held since being kidnapped from England last August on a completely illegal European arrest warrant. The National Health Federation retained the French criminal law specialist attorney who won the court hearing today by arguing strenuously that the French government was acting illegally under European Union law, especially where the European Court of Justice is challenging the validity of the European arrest warrants because in France it is issued by a prosecutor, and the prosecutor is not an independent judge as is required by European standards. So Lynn will be released on Sunday, December the 8th, unless the government appeals. As the last I've heard is that the government has not appealed at this point. So it's looking like she's going to be released on this coming Sunday. And I think a big congratulations needs to be given to the legal team from the National Health Federation for getting her out. Now, of course, this doesn't solve the overall problem because she will still have to face trial in France, and hopefully this will have implications for the potential extradition of David Noakes to France. We have to see how that pans out, but at least Lynn will be out of prison and hopefully back in the UK for Christmas.
Yeah, which is very good. I'll just end by saying that, of course, election leaflets have been popping through the door here in Plymouth and the Devon area. Fascinated to see that my local MP Gary Streeter pushing out his Conservative leaflet, where the Conservatives are going to achieve Brexit, Mike, and they're going to get on with running the country. And of course, they're fully supporting the NHS. So no mention of privatisation of the NHS, which is virtually complete. No mention of defence or EU Defence Union. This seemed to be a very slimmed down election leaflet, just a couple of points to keep people with the idea that there is an election coming, but no real detail or substance. But what interested me, it was actually addressed to my wife. I've spoken to a couple of other people, their households have had election material addressed to the lady in the House, but apparently not the men. Now, this might be some small aberration of the system, or possibly what we've got going on here is in this election, they're going for a different demographic in order to achieve the election result. And Gary Streeter at least was very happy to tell you what's really coming, because it's either a small workable Conservative majority or we're in for a hung parliament. So I think they've sort of agreed it all behind the scenes anyway, Mike.
I certainly haven't seen a less interesting general election campaign for many, many years, if ever. So no. It's pretty uninspiring, and I don't quite see how they're going to get a vote out. The likelihood of a hung parliament has to be much higher as a result.
In which case, all of the politics we've been describing over the last few weeks, this chaotic, confusing mess, can continue for years. Absolutely. Which would seem to be a pretty good objective for Britain's government of occupation. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to everybody who's subscribing to the UK column. If you're not, please do, because we can only do what we do with your financial support. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.